The man is hanging off the side of a bridge, 250 feet above open water, with a half-inch of steel between his boot sole and a long fall. He is wearing a tin can on his hand like a boxing glove. Inside the can is a rivet so hot it glows the color of a peach. He has maybe 2 seconds before his fingers die. Below the beam, sitting cross-legged on a board of scaffold plank, another man waits with a humming hammer pressed against the steel plate. Above him, a third man braces a heavy iron cup the size of a soup tureen against the back of the joint. The catcher throws the rivet. The man with the cup catches it in the cup. The hammer man fires. The rivet flattens into a sealed head with a noise like a rifle going off inside a galvanized bucket. One joint sealed forever. Another rivet. Another. Another. There are 6.5 million of them ahead of him on this bridge alone. To understand how that moment became possible, you have to back up almost a century, to a workshop in Gloucester, England, in 1871. The problem before the 1870s was brutally simple. Steel and iron want to be one piece, but you cannot cut them, glue them, or zip them together. You cannot melt them next to each other or the parts warp. The only way to make a permanent, load-bearing joint out of 2 chunks of structural metal was the rivet, a soft iron pin shoved through aligned holes, then smashed flat at both ends by a hammer until the heads locked the plates together so tight that friction did most of the work. Hand-riveting crews, 4 men and a forge boy, had been doing this since the 1820s on bridges, boilers, and ships. A good crew could set maybe 200 rivets in a 10-hour day. The forge was always 1 man away from being on fire. The hammerman, swinging a 16-pound hammer from a standing position, was exhausted by lunch. A bad rivet, a cold one, a crooked one, a half-driven one, would sit secretly inside a bridge for 40 years, then snap in February ice and send 1,000 tons of structure into the river below. For the most demanding jobs there was only one alternative to the hand hammer, and it was enormous. Fixed hydraulic riveting machines had been used since the 1850s in boiler shops. Imagine a cast-iron C-clamp the size of a dining table, with 2,000 tons of squeeze built into the throat of the press. You slid your plate into the machine, popped a red-hot rivet into the hole, and the operator pulled a lever. A column of water under pressure did the work of 20 hammer swings in one slow, silent crush. The joint was perfect. The problem was that the boiler had to come to the machine. The bridge could not. The man who broke that limitation was Ralph Hartweddell, a 28-year-old engineer in Gloucester, who had spent the previous 5 years building hydraulic presses for dockside use. In 1871 he approached Fielding and Platt, a local firm already making hydraulic machinery, with a sketch of something they had never built, a portable hydraulic riveter, a yoke you could carry up a bridge tower, swing into a joint, and squeeze a rivet with a few hundred tons of pressure, a fraction of the press, but enough, powered by an oil pump and a hose. Fielding and Platt signed on. The machine was patented in 1876. The first field test came even earlier, in 1873, on a small wrought iron bridge carrying Primrose Street over the North London Railway, where an engineer named W. H. Panton set a handful of experimental rivets that were later pulled out for inspection. They were, by every account, perfect. It was ingenious. It was also, in its early form, absurdly heavy. The first Tweddell rig weighed about 400 pounds, hung from a chain block, and required a small pump crew to operate. By making it portable, Tweddell had not eliminated the worker, he had changed which worker. Now a single squeeze operator could replace a 4-man hand crew, but a 4-man hand crew was still needed to feed the rivets, heat the rivets, hold the bucking bar. The machine moved the violence from muscle to mechanism. That is a different thing from removing it. Where the portable hydraulic riveter became a national obsession was the Forth Bridge, the giant cantilever over the Firth of Forth in Scotland, designed by John Fowler and Benjamin Baker, built under Sir William Arrow from 1882 to 1890. The bridge demanded 53,000 tons of steel, 250,000 tons of concrete in the foundations, and this is the number nobody forgets, 6.5 million rivets. 210,000 rivets per month. 2,400 per shift. The riveting crews, working off hydraulic travelers that crawled up the rising tubes like slow iron caterpillars, set that river of rivets across 7 years of Scottish weather. The last rivet, gold-plated, was driven home on March 4, 1890, by the Prince of Wales. It weighs about as much as a small dog. The technology that would eventually rival the hydraulic riveter arrived in Detroit in 1890, when Charles Brady King patented a pneumatic hammer, a rivet gun driven by compressed air. Unlike the hydraulic squeezer, which worked by slow pressure, the pneumatic hammer worked by percussion. It mimicked a man swinging a hammer, but about 20 times per second. It was lighter than the Tweddle rig. It was faster. It was louder. By 1910 it had displaced hydraulic riveting on most American high-steel jobs, because American crews did not have the patience or the union structure to stage 4 men around a slow hydraulic yoke on every joint. They had the energy to point a noisy gun at a rivet until it seated itself. The pneumatic rivet gun became the tool of the steel skyline. But the choreography of the 4-man rivet crew is worth describing in detail, because it is the only reason any of these bridges or towers is standing today. At the forge, a heater boy, sometimes a girl, sometimes a boy no older than 13, fed red-hot rivets into a coal forge kept at 1,000 degrees, and tossed them one at a time to the catcher. The catcher stood on the steel, often on a 6-inch wide beam 200 feet in the air, with a leather-faced tin can strapped to his hand. He caught the rivet, middle finger first, palm out, the rivet already burning through the leather, and, in the time it takes you to read this sentence, walked or ran to the joint and jammed it into the cold hole. Behind the plate, a third man, the bucker-up, held a 30-pound iron dolly against the formed head of the rivet so that nothing would move when the gun went off. The fourth man, the gunner, gun operator, hammerman, whatever they called him on the job, pulled the trigger. The pneumatic hammer beat the rivet at a frequency of roughly 1,500 blows per minute. The catcher was already gone, running back to the forge for another rivet. A disciplined 4-man crew could set between 500 and 1,000 rivets in a single 10-hour shift. At the Empire State Building, starting in March 1930, for such crews worked around each rising column, with about 100,000 rivets embedded in the original skeletal frame. The Empire State Building went up at a rate of 14 floors a week. It went up because a teenage heater boy could not say no. Because that is the moral of the tool. The hydraulic and pneumatic riveters did not invent the danger of riveting. Hand riveting was already killing and deafening men. What the machines did was multiply the danger across a much larger labor force, much faster, across much taller structures, where the consequence of one bad rivet was no longer a cracked boiler, but a collapsing skyline. And the labor force was, overwhelmingly, the labor force that nobody wrote poems about. Immigrant ironworkers on the Empire State. Mohawk skywalkers from the Conowake Reserve outside Montreal, who for 3 generations were the crews no one else trusted to walk an I-beam in high wind. Irish navvies under the caissons of the East River setting the foundations for the Brooklyn Bridge, breathing air so pressurized by hydraulic locks that when they emerged they sometimes collapsed, doubled over, with black blotches rising across their skin, the bends, named for the posture it left you in. On the Eads Bridge over the Mississippi, opened in 1874, 119 caisson workers developed decompression sickness, and 14 of them died. Their names are on a small plaque on the bridge that almost nobody sees. And then, of course, there's the rivet that wasn't good enough. On the night of April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg off Newfoundland. Most of the public argument since has been about the steel plates, the watertight bulkheads, the iceberg itself. The deeper argument, the one that metallurgists have made repeatedly since the wreck was located in 1985, is about the rivets. The bow and stern plates were held together by roughly 3 million wrought iron rivets. A post-recovery analysis showed that the iron used for those rivets contained roughly 3 times the slag, the stony, brittle waste left over from smelting, that would be allowed in a modern equivalent. Cold North Atlantic water, around 4 degrees below freezing, made the already brittle metal worse. When the hull plate flexed under the impact, the rivets didn't bend with it. They popped. The seams opened. The plates peeled apart as slow as a curtain. The Titanic did not sink because of one bad rivet. It sank because a procurement decision at Harland and Wolff had steered a multi-million rivet order toward a cheaper iron contractor. That is one of the cruelest ironies in the history of industrial engineering. The most famous maritime machine failure of the 20th century was, at the rivet level, a procurement failure. After the Second World War, riveting began to die, not slowly, and not without being kicked. By 1944, American shipyards were reporting 7 1/3 disabling injuries per 100 workers per year. Roughly 700 shipyard employees were dying annually from industrial accidents, roughly 4 times the wartime civilian workplace average. The Bureau of Labor Statistics logged more than 2 million disabling injuries per year in U.S. industry between 1942 and 1945. Welding, which had been quietly perfected as an industrial process during the war, did not need a catcher. It did not need a heater boy. It did not need a gunner. 2 men with a torch and a helmet could replace a 4-man rivet crew. The transition was so fast that by the early 1950s, structural riveting on ships and skyscrapers was already historical. The hydraulic riveter was a steel-age substitute for a handshake, one iron grip, set forever, decided in roughly 2 seconds, never let go. The pneumatic rivet gun was its louder cousin, same promise, more noise, more speed, more bodies used up for it. Both tools took a craft that was once measured in human breath and converted it into something a clock could measure. They made the modern skyline possible because they made it cheap to be brave, and because the cheapness was, for almost a century, paid for by the same workers the cities they built never publicly thanked. If you walk the Brooklyn Bridge on a weekday morning, you will pass about 6,000 structural rivets in the first half-mile, set between 1875 and 1883 by crews who went deaf for them. If you fly out of LaGuardia and look left as you turn south, the Empire State Building is still up on roughly 100,000 of them, hammered home by heater boys who never made the news. If you take the train from Edinburgh to Dundee across the Forth, you cross a bridge on 6.5 million of them, half of them still doing their job exactly as the hydraulic travelers installed them in 1888. A handful of those very rivets are still in place today. The machines that drove them are gone. The men who aimed them are gone. The work is still doing what it was set to do. If you want one number to drop on someone at a dinner party, 3 million rivets, 3 times too much slag, and a ship that was supposed to be unsinkable. That number, more than any other, is what the riveter was, a tool so precise it could save a city, and so cheap it could sink one. If this piece made you look up at the next steel beam you walk under a little differently, leave a comment, and tell me what you'd like covered next. Subscribe. I post a new steel and metal history deep dive every other week, and the next one starts where today's ends.